On February 20, 1945, in the northern sector of Iwo Jima, Japanese troops watched in confusion as unusual American tanks pushed forward through the gray volcanic ash. Dark smoke drifted behind them, not from battle damage, but from something unfamiliar. One tank slowly rotated its turret toward a reinforced bunker, but instead of a cannon's muzzle, the defenders saw a strange attachment, a redesigned tube ending in a nozzle. A sharp mechanical hiss followed, like air rushing from a compressor. A heartbeat later, a massive stream of burning fuel blasted outward, sweeping across 150 yards and swallowing a nearby pillbox in a sheet of napalm-thick fire. The screams faded almost instantly. Japanese soldiers scrambled for their field phones to report the nightmare unfolding before them. 8 specially altered Sherman tanks outfitted with flamethrowers, devices unlike anything they had ever faced, weapons that would radically reshape the brutal fighting on Iwo Jima. What they could not know was that these tanks were the result of months of secret experimentation at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii, where Navy Seabees had worked without pause to create them. It was a fusion of American industrial power and battlefield necessity, and one Marine battalion commander would later describe the result as the most effective single weapon of the entire operation. As the battle for Iwo Jima entered its second day, the cold arithmetic of warfare shifted dramatically. Those 8 tanks alone would be responsible for over 30% of all Japanese casualties by fire, figures that survivors from both sides would remember with dread for decades to come. The 43rd Chemical Company's first creation, Hells of Fire, demonstrated the concept's potential, but revealed critical limitations. The turret traverse was limited to 180 degrees. The flame gun's elevation was restricted. Most critically, the light tank's thin armor made it vulnerable to Japanese 47mm anti-tank guns that were standard equipment in defensive positions. UNM's team needed something better. Through military channels that reached to the highest levels, UNMA reported directly to Admiral Chester Nimitz's staff. They located 8 M4A3 Sherman medium tanks available for conversion. These tanks displaced 35 tons powered by a 500 horsepower Ford GAAV8 engine with armor ranging from 25mm to 76mm thickness. Standard armament included a 75mm main gun and multiple 30 caliber machine guns. The Shermans had proven their durability in European combat and possessed the armor protection necessary to survive Japanese anti-tank fire. But finding tanks was only the beginning. The real innovation came when Riker and Kell decided to combine the best elements from 3 existing flamethrower systems: the British Ronson, the Navy Mark I, and captured German designs from North Africa. Working 20-hour days in the Hawaiian heat, sleeping in shifts beside their welding equipment, the CBS began creating something unprecedented. The resulting weapon, designated CBH-1, Construction Battalion Hawaii 1, represented a quantum leap in flamethrower technology. Installation required 150 pounds of welding rod and 1,100 electrical connections, each one critical to the weapon's function. The conversion took 1,200 man-hours per tank, with 150 parts specially machined by CB metalworkers. Each conversion cost between $20,000 and $25,000, equivalent to $360,000. In modern currency, the technical specifications were revolutionary. The CBH-1 operated at 300 lb per square in pressure, triple that of previous designs. Maximum range extended to 150 yards with thickened fuel, nearly 3 times the distance of portable flamethrowers. The fuel mixture, a carefully calibrated blend of diesel fuel, gasoline, and napalm thickener developed by the 43rd Chemical Laboratory, would burn at 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The system could maintain continuous fire for up to 80 seconds, though doctrine recommended bursts of 2 to 3 seconds to conserve fuel and maintain accuracy. Most critically, the flamethrower replaced the tank's main gun, allowing full traverse of 270 degrees and elevation from -10 to +35 degrees through the tank's existing fire control systems. The gunner could aim the flame weapon as accurately as a conventional cannon using the same periscope and controls. This integration meant tank crews required minimal additional training to operate the new weapon effectively. But perhaps the most important innovation was psychological. The CBS painted the modified tanks in standard Marine Corps olive drab. No special markings, no indication of their terrible purpose. To Japanese observers, they appeared to be ordinary Sherman tanks until the moment they opened fire. By then, it was too late. The fuel system itself was a marvel of engineering. The main fuel tanks held 290 g of thickened fuel with an additional 10 gal of unthickened fuel for ignition. A separate pressure tank contained compressed nitrogen chosen over compressed air because nitrogen wouldn't support combustion if the tank was hit. The entire system was designed with multiple safety features to prevent the catastrophic explosions that had plagued earlier flamethrower vehicles. Inside the command bunker beneath Hill 382, General Kurabayashi had positioned his defenses according to precise mathematical calculations. Kill zones overlapped at specific angles. Artillery spotters hidden in spider holes could direct fire onto any grid coordinate within seconds. Machine gun nests were positioned to create interlocking fields of fire that would channel American forces into pre-registered artillery targets. The general's defensive philosophy was elegantly simple. Conserve ammunition. Remain underground. Make the Americans come to you. His standing orders issued to every commander were explicit. Do not die until you have killed 10 Americans. No large-scale counterattacks would be permitted. Every soldier was instructed to maintain position until overrun, then fight with grenades, bayonets, and finally bare hands. Simple mathematics suggested that with 21,000 defenders, they could inflict 210,000 casualties. Far more than the entire American invasion force. Japanese defensive doctrine had evolved significantly since the early Pacific battles. Intelligence reports from Saipan and Peleliu emphasized the vulnerability of flamethrower operators. The weapon's signature, the black smoke from burning diesel fuel, made operators easy to spot. The weapon's limited range meant operators had to expose themselves to enemy fire. In previous battles, portable flamethrower casualties had exceeded 70%, with some units suffering 92% losses among flame operators. Special training emphasized anti-flamethrower tactics. Machine gunners were instructed to concentrate fire on any soldier carrying the distinctive twin tanks of a portable flamethrower. Snipers received extra ammunition specifically for targeting flame operators. Infantry units practiced rushing flamethrower positions with bayonets, exploiting the weapon's minimum range where the operator couldn't depress the nozzle enough to defend himself. But all Japanese planning assumed flamethrowers would be carried by infantry. The concept of armored flamethrowers, tanks that could approach fortified positions under cover of their own armor while delivering accurate incendiary attacks at unprecedented range, had never been considered. Japanese defensive positions, carefully designed to withstand artillery and aerial bombardment, had no special provisions against burning petroleum that could seep through apertures in ventilation shafts. This oversight would prove catastrophic. The fortifications that were Japan's greatest strength would become death traps when faced with weapons that turned solid defenses into crematoriums. The 8 M4A3 flamethrower tanks landed on Uema's beaches on February 19, D-Day, mixed among the regular Sherman tanks of the 4th and 5th Tank Battalions. The official Marine Corps designation was M4A3 or 5. Though various documents used different nomenclature, including POACWSH1 and CB-1 Malawi and Kwacha. They came ashore in the 5th wave, around 1,000 hours after the beaches had been marginally secured. Navy orders specified they remain in reserve during the initial assault. Marine commanders wanted to assess the tactical situation before committing these valuable and irreplaceable assets. The tanks were distributed carefully for assigned to the 4th Marine Division, 4 to the 5th Marine Division. Each tank had been given a number for identification. 431 through 438. Some crews had painted nicknames on their vehicles. Hellfire, Cork Crew, Blaze of Glory. But most remained unmarked, their terrible purpose hidden. Until the moment of engagement. For the first 24 hours, the flamethrower tanks sat idle near the beach, while Marines died by the hundreds, trying to advance against invisible Japanese positions. The volcanic ash, which rose to the top of a man's calf with each step, made infantry movement exhausting. Conventional tactics were failing catastrophically. Naval gunfire couldn't penetrate bunkers buried under 10 feet of volcanic rock and concrete. Artillery shells exploded harmlessly against positions designed to withstand direct hits from 16 inches naval guns. Marine riflemen found themselves attacking fortifications that might as well have been solid mountains. The first day's casualties were staggering. 2,420 Marines killed or wounded. The beach itself became a killing field as Japanese artillery, previously hidden, opened fire on the concentrated landing forces. Sherman tanks attempting to move inland bogged down in the ash or were destroyed by concealed anti-tank guns. By nightfall, the invasion force had advanced less than 700 yards from the beach, far short of D-Day objectives. That called for capturing the first airfield. On the morning of February 20th, D+1, the situation was desperate. The 21st Marine Regiment was pinned down attempting to cross Motoyama Airfield No. 1. 3 concrete pillboxes dominated the approach, their interlocking machine gun fire creating a kill zone 200 yards wide. 2 rifle companies had already been decimated attempting frontal assaults. The regiment had suffered 35% casualties in less than 48 hours. Lieutenant Colonel William Duplantis, commanding the 3rd Battalion, 21st Marines, made the decision that would change the battle's trajectory. He called for the flamethrower tanks. At 1,420 hours, the 1st M4A3 Air 3 flamethrower tank entered combat. Tank number 431, commanded by Staff Sergeant Robert Meza, a veteran of Saipan and Tinian, approached the Japanese positions from an oblique angle, using destroyed Japanese aircraft as cover. To Japanese observers, it appeared to be another standard Sherman attempting the same failed assault. The tank's approach was cautious. Meza understood that surprise would be their only advantage. Inside the tank, the 5-man crew prepared for action. Driver, Private First Class James Morrison, guided the vehicle through the volcanic ash that threatened to bog down the 35-ton vehicle. Assistant driver, Private Robert Shin manned the bow machine gun, watching for Japanese infantry. Loader Corporal Anthony Vitelli checked the fuel pressure gauges. 300 psi, optimal for maximum range. Gunner Corporal Thomas Carlson peered through his periscope, tracking the nearest pillbox. At 125 yards from the nearest pillbox, Meza gave the order. Gunner, flamethrower. Pillbox, fire. The CBH-1 flamethrower erupted with a sound witnesses described as the devil's own blowtorch. A stream of napalm-thickened fuel oil arced through the air, propelled by compressed nitrogen. The burning liquid struck the pillbox aperture with devastating accuracy, splashing through the machine gun port and flowing inside like lava. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. Temperatures inside the concrete structure soared past 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit in seconds. The oxygen was consumed so rapidly that Japanese soldiers suffocated before the flames reached them. Those who survived the initial blast attempted to flee through rear exits, only to be cut down by Marine riflemen who had learned to position themselves for exactly this eventuality. Sergeant Meza traversed the turret 30 degrees and engaged the second pillbox. This time, the defenders were ready. A. Japanese 47mm anti-tank gun fired point blank, the shell striking the Sherman's frontal armor and ricocheting skyward. The tank shuddered but continued advancing. Carlson triggered another burst, maintaining fire for 15 seconds until black smoke billowed from every aperture of the fortification. The third pillbox required different tactics. Its position behind a rocky outcropping prevented direct engagement. Meeser ordered Morrison to advance within 80 yards dangerously close to Japanese infantry positions. As the tank crested a small rise, Japanese soldiers emerged from spider holes, rushing forward with satchel charges and magnetic mines. The tank's bow gunner opened fire with his .30 caliber machine gun, but several Japanese soldiers reached the vehicle's blind spot. This was the moment the CB's modifications proved their worth. Unlike standard flamethrower tanks that could only fire forward, the CBH-1's full traverse capability allowed Carlson to swing the turret 180 degrees and fire directly behind the tank. The attacking infantry were consumed by a blazing wall that witnesses said looked like the gates of hell opening. With the third pillbox neutralized, Marines of the 21st Regiment advanced 400 yards in 2 hours, more progress than they had made in the previous 2 days. Word spread rapidly through the Marine communications network. The flamethrower tanks worked. More importantly, they survived where conventional tanks failed. Within 6 hours, all 8 flamethrower tanks were in action across the front. The tactical revolution was immediate and profound. Tank number 434, supporting the 23rd Marines near the East Boat Basin, destroyed 4 fortified positions in a single afternoon. The crew developed a technique called cork crew and burn, approaching an A spiral pattern to avoid anti-tank fire while maintaining continuous flame suppression. The psychological effect was as devastating as the physical destruction. Japanese soldiers who had been trained to die at their posts began fleeing positions when they saw the flame tanks approaching, abandoning fortifications rather than face incineration. Tank number 437 pioneered breach and clear tactics with the 24th Marines. The flamethrower would first neutralize A position's defenders. Then Marine engineers would rush forward with demolition charges to permanently destroy the fortification. This combination proved devastatingly effective against positions that had resisted days of conventional assault. In one afternoon, a single flame tank engineer team destroyed 7 bunkers that had stopped an entire battalion's advance. But it was tank number 432 that demonstrated the weapon's true psychological impact. Supporting the 26th Marines near the base of Mount Suribachi, the tank approached a complex of interconnected caves. Commander Sergeant William Patterson ordered his driver to stop 100 yards from the cave entrances. Through the tank's periscope, Patterson could see Japanese soldiers watching from the darkness. Patterson triggered a short burst of flame into the air, a demonstration. The psychological effect was immediate and unprecedented. Japanese soldiers began fleeing from rear exits, abandoning positions they had been ordered to defend to the death. Marine riflemen were so surprised they initially failed to fire on the retreating enemy. In 30 minutes, an entire defensive sector collapsed without the tank firing a shot directly at enemy positions. This represented the first mass abandonment of defensive positions in Japanese military history. By nightfall on February 20th, Marine units were already modifying their tactics around flamethrower tank availability. Attack plans were postponed until flame tanks could be brought forward. Infantry units learned to follow 50 yards behind the tanks, close enough to exploit the shock effect, but far enough to avoid the heat blast that could singe eyebrows. At 30-yard, artillery observers began marking targets specifically for flamethrower engagement rather than conventional bombardment. The numbers from the first day of flame tank combat were striking. 47 fortified positions destroyed. Marine casualties in supported sectors down 40% from the previous day. 600 yards of territory gained in areas that had been static for 48 hours. But the most significant statistic was psychological. For the first time, significant numbers of Japanese soldiers were abandoning positions rather than dying at their posts. The Japanese response was swift but largely ineffective. General Kuribayashi issued emergency orders that night, designating the flame tanks as priority targets. All available 47mm anti-tank guns were to concentrate fire on these vehicles. Special assault teams were organized. Volunteers who would attack with explosive charges strapped to their bodies. Infantry units were instructed to target the flame tanks' vision blocks with concentrated rifle fire, hoping to blind the crews. But the fundamental problem remained insurmountable. The flamethrower tanks looked identical to regular Shermans until they fired. Japanese gunners couldn't identify priority targets until it was too late. Worse, focusing on flame tanks meant ignoring conventional tanks that provided covering fire. The Americans had achieved tactical surprise through mechanical innovation. On February 23, D+4, the same day Marines raised the flag on Mount Suribachi, the flamethrower tanks faced their greatest test. The 3rd Marine Division was attempting to capture Hill 382, the second highest point on Ioma and the cornerstone of Kuribayashi's northern defenses. The hill was honeycombed with bunkers and tunnels reaching 7 stories underground. Japanese defenders had pre-registered every approach with artillery and mortars. The position had been designed by Japanese engineers to be impregnable. Multiple defensive lines, interlocking fields of fire, underground galleries, allowing defenders to reappear behind attackers. Previous assaults had failed with casualties exceeding 50%. The 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, had lost 70% of its strength attempting to take just the approaches to the hill. At 0800 hours, 4 flamethrower tanks advanced in echelon formation, supported by 6 conventional Shermans and a battalion of Marine infantry. This time, the Japanese were ready. Hidden 75mm mountain guns, larger than the standard 47mm anti-tank weapons, had been positioned specifically to engage flame tanks. As the lead flame tank crested the first rise, concentrated fire erupted from 3 concealed positions. The first round struck Tank 433's track, immobilizing it. The crew continued firing the flamethrower while stationary, creating a curtain of flame that obscured following vehicles and suppressed Japanese positions. This self-sacrifice allowed the other tanks to maneuver. Tank number 431 pushed through the smoke, advancing through artillery fire. That would have stopped an infantry assault cold. Shell fragments rattled against the armor like hail. The driver, Private First Class Morrison, later described navigating by periscope through smoke so thick he could barely see 10 feet ahead. At 60 yards from the main Japanese bunker complex, Tank 434's flamethrower erupted. But this time, the Japanese had adapted. Engineers had installed steel plates over bunker apertures that could be closed between machine gun bursts. The flame splashed harmlessly against sealed steel. It seemed the Japanese had found a counter to the flame tanks. Gunner Corporal Michael Rodriguez made a critical observation. The steel plates glowed cherry red after sustained flame contact. Metal that hot would warp, creating gaps. Rodriguez maintained fire for 45 seconds, far longer than doctrine recommended, dangerously depleting fuel reserves. The steel plate buckled. The incendiary mixture poured through the gaps. The bunker's interior became an inferno. Ammunition cooked off in explosive chains. Concrete cracked from thermal shock. Secondary explosions revealed the tunnel entrances Japanese engineers had carefully concealed. Marine infantry rushed forward with Satchel charges, throwing explosives into every opening before the defenders could reorganize. In 3 hours, Hill 382's outer defenses had been breached. The impregnable position was falling, but the battle also revealed the flamethrower tank's limitations. Tank number 431 exhausted its fuel supply after 80 seconds of continuous operation. Refueling required withdrawing to designated areas where specialized fuel trucks waited, a process that took 2 hours minimum. During that time, Japanese defenders could reinforce and reorganize. The tanks were powerful, but not inexhaustible. Most significantly, on this same day, Corporal Herschel Woody Williams demonstrated that man-portable flamethrowers still had a critical role. When flamethrower tanks couldn't maneuver through a narrow ravine called the amphitheater, Williams advanced on foot with a 70-pound M2-2 flamethrower. In 4 hours of combat, covered only by 4 riflemen, 2 of whom would die protecting him, Williams destroyed 7 pillboxes that were inaccessible to tanks. Williams's technique complemented the flame tanks perfectly. Where tanks couldn't go, brave men with portable flamethrowers could still advance. His actions that day would earn him the Medal of Honor. He would become the last surviving World War II Medal of Honor recipient, passing away in June 2022 at age 98. His citation read in part, "Quick to volunteer his services when our tanks were maneuvering vainly to open a lane for the infantry through the network of reinforced concrete pillboxes, buried mines, and black volcanic sands." Corporal Williams daringly went forward alone to attempt the reduction of devastating machine gun fire from the unyielding positions. The statistics from the first week of combat told a remarkable story. In sectors where flamethrower tanks operated, Marine casualties dropped by 40% compared to unsupported attacks. Japanese positions that had resisted days of conventional assault fell within hours. The 8 tanks had consumed 70,000 gal of fuel mixture in 7 days, destroying an estimated 300 fortified positions. Daily consumption averaged 10,000 gallons, a logistical challenge that required establishing special fuel depots near the front lines. By early March, the battle had shifted to Iwo Jima's northern plateau, a hellscape of sulfur pits, twisted ravines, and volcanic rock formations that made tank operations nearly impossible. General Kurabayashi had positioned his final defensive line here precisely because the terrain favored defenders. The area had been designated the meat grinder by Marines who faced 850 casualties taking a single hill. Tanks that attempted to navigate the broken ground through tracks on sharp volcanic rocks or bellied out on obstacles invisible beneath the ash. The flamethrower tanks adapted again. Unable to maneuver freely, they became mobile pillboxes positioned at key points to support infantry advances. Marine engineers from the 5th Engineer Battalion worked through the night, constructing ramps and clearing paths often under sniper fire, allowing flame tanks to reach positions previously thought inaccessible. When direct assault proved impossible, the tanks fired indirectly, bouncing flame streams off rocks to reach around corners and into defilated positions. On March 8, D+17, tank number 436 achieved what crews called the impossible shot, supporting the 9th Marines' assault on Cushman's Pocket, a complex of caves and bunkers built into a near-vertical cliff face. The tank commander, Sergeant Daniel Foster, calculated that flame fired at maximum elevation might arc over the cliff edge and fall into Japanese positions from above. The physics were marginal. The CBH-1 flamethrower could elevate to 35 degrees, but reaching the target required a 40 degrees angle. Foster ordered his driver to position the tank on a pile of rubble created by naval bombardment, tilting the entire vehicle backward. With the tank precariously balanced and enemy mortar rounds falling around them, Gunner Corporal Anthony Vitelli triggered the flamethrower. The molten napalm arced high into the air, seemed to hang for a moment at its apex, then cascaded down into the Japanese positions. The effect was devastating, not just physically, but psychologically. Japanese soldiers had believed their elevated positions were immune to flamethrower attack. That assumption died in the inferno. Witnesses reported Japanese soldiers leaping from the cliffs rather than burn alive, choosing death by falling over death by fire. By mid-March, the flamethrower tanks had evolved into the centerpiece of a combined arms system. Each flame tank operated with a dedicated support team. Conventional tanks for suppressing enemy anti-tank guns, infantry for close protection against suicide attackers, engineers for obstacle clearance, and ammunition carriers bringing forward the 300-gallon fuel trailers that extended operational time. This integration represented a revolution in assault tactics that would influence Marine Corps doctrine for decades. The fuel logistics alone required extraordinary effort. Electricians Mate Second S. Kissel, one of the original designers, had accompanied the tanks to Ioma to supervise maintenance. He later reported that keeping the 8 tanks operational required a supply chain stretching back to Pearl Harbor. Fuel mixing stations operated 24 hours a day, combining diesel fuel, gasoline, and napalm powder in precise ratios. The mixture had to be used within 72 hours or it would separate and clog the flame guns. The Japanese response continued to evolve as well. Specialized anti-tank squads were formed of volunteers who would attack with explosives strapped to their bodies. These human bombs achieved occasional successes. On March 11, Tank 438 was destroyed when a Japanese soldier detonated himself against its engine compartment, killing 3 of the 5 crew members. Yet such tactics ultimately proved ineffective. For every flame tank taken out, replacements arrived from the beach, and damaged tanks were often repaired and returned to service. Observing from his command bunker deep beneath the northern plateau, General Kurabayashi grasped the strategic significance. In his final report to Imperial Headquarters on March 17, he wrote, "The enemy's specialized flame tanks have been more effective than all their artillery and aerial bombardments combined. They accomplish in minutes what conventional weapons cannot in days. We have no counter to this weapon." The Americans possess not only superior numbers but also superior creativity. The climax came in the final week of March as Marines advanced into the gorge, Kurabayashi's last stronghold. This convoluted network of ravines and caves, nicknamed the Bloody Gorge by the Marines, became the ultimate test of American tactical innovation against Japanese defensive determination. In an area less than 700 yards across, the remaining 3,000 Japanese defenders prepared for their final stand. On March 21, D+30, all operational flamethrower tanks, 6 of the original 8, with 2 under repair, were deployed in a coordinated assault. They were reinforced by 4 additional tanks shipped from Hawaii, though these newer models used the less effective Ronson system, with only 60 to 80-yard range. Nevertheless, this marked the largest concentration of flame tanks in the Pacific War. Tank 431, repaired after being disabled on Hill 382, led the attack, its armor scarred from prior combat, patched where shell fragments had pierced, dented from dozens of hits that failed to penetrate, and scorched from near misses. Tank 433, with a makeshift track repair producing a distinctive clanking sound, took the left flank. Tanks 434, 436, and 437 formed the center, while 432 anchored the right. The assault began at 1,000 hours in a crescent formation, creating overlapping arcs of flame, leaving no gaps for Japanese defenders. Marine infantry followed, deploying white phosphorus grenades into cave entrances to mark targets for the tanks. Engineers used demolition charges to seal positions cleared by the flames. Japanese resistance remained fanatical but increasingly futile. Suicide squads charged from concealed spider holes only to be incinerated before reaching their targets. Anti-tank crews fired point-blank even as flames consumed their positions. In one remarkable incident, a Japanese officer emerged from a bunker wielding a samurai sword, charging Tank 434. The tank's bow gunner hesitated, possibly from shock or respect, allowing Marines to eliminate the officer mere yards away. His sword was later recovered and sent to Marine Corps headquarters as a symbol of desperate courage. By sunset on March 21, the gorge had been breached. Over 800 Japanese defenders lay dead, many burned beyond recognition. The flame tanks consumed 8,000 gallons of fuel mixture in a single day, a campaign record. Marine casualties, while still significant at 92 killed and 257 wounded, were far lower than would have been expected in a conventional assault. The toll on tank crews was psychological, many reported trauma from their role in the slaughter. Corporal Carlson of Tank 431 later testified, "You could hear them screaming when the flame hit. Not long, but sometimes at night. I still hear it. We did what we had to do, but I'll never forget the smell of burning flesh mixed with volcanic sulfur." Maintenance crews faced gruesome work, removing human remains fused to tank tracks with blowtorches. The tanks themselves suffered under constant strain, transmissions failed from ash-laden terrain, fuel lines clogged with carbon residue, and track pins broke under the weight of extra armor. By late March, keeping even 4 tanks operational required scavenging parts from damaged units. On March 26, 1945, Uoma was declared secure. The battle had lasted 36 days instead of the projected 5. American losses totaled 26,038, including 6,821 killed, a figure that shocked both the public and military leadership. Japanese casualties were nearly total. Of roughly 21,000 defenders, only 216 survived as prisoners. The rest died in combat or increasingly took their own lives rather than face capture or death by flame. The flame tanks had transformed the battle. Post-action reports credited them with preventing an estimated 5,000 American casualties, destroying over 1,000 fortified positions, consuming 360,000 gallons of fuel mixture, and reshaping Marine Corps assault tactics. Crucially, they shattered the myth of Japanese invincibility in defensive positions. Captain Frank Caldwell, commanding Company F, 26th Marines, summarized, "It was the flame tank, more than any other support, that won this battle. Artillery, naval gunfire, and airstrikes couldn't drive the Japanese from their underground fortresses. The flamethrowers did what nothing else could." Statistics revealed the weapon's impact. Over 30% of Japanese casualties on Uoma were inflicted by flame weapons, both tank-mounted and portable. In sectors with flame tanks, the Marines' advance rate tripled compared to unsupported attacks. The 216 Japanese prisoners, an unusual number in Pacific battles, frequently cited the fear of being burned alive as their reason for surrender. The tactical implications extended beyond Uoma. The Marine Corps immediately requested 54 more flame tanks for future operations. Colonel Unmack's team at Schofield Barracks accelerated production under AAA priority, equivalent to that assigned to the B-29 bomber and the Manhattan Project, developing the improved CBH-2 model with greater range and reliability. By June 1945, 70 new flame tanks were ready for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan. Observing the Marines' success at Uoma, the Army expanded its own flame tank program. The 713th Tank Battalion was fully converted for the Okinawa campaign. During the Battle of Okinawa, April–June 1945, Army flame tanks consumed 200,000 gallons of fuel mixture, proving equally effective against Japanese cave complexes. What began as a last-minute improvisation had become standard equipment in the Pacific. Strategically, the weapon highlighted the failure of Japanese doctrine refined over centuries to counter American innovation. The flame tanks represented far more than a new weapon. They embodied the transformation of warfare from individual courage to industrial capability. The production statistics tell their own story. Colonel on Mars. Flame Tank Group ultimately produced 354 flame tanks by war's end. The CBS at Schofield Barracks manufactured 226,343 gall of flamethrower fuel. The napalm mixing plant they constructed could produce 1,000 gallons per day. This industrial capability replicated across the Pacific meant American forces could literally burn their way through Japanese defenses. The CBS who had created these weapons received little public recognition. Machinist mate Rasher and electricians mate Kissel returned to civilian life after the war, their names forgotten, except in obscure technical reports. Colonel UNM continued developing chemical weapons until retirement, his contribution to victory known only to a few military historians. Yet their innovation had saved thousands of American lives and shortened one of the Pacific War's bloodiest battles. The Tank crews faced different challenges. Many struggled with what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. The memory of human beings turned to ash, of screams cut short by consuming flame, haunted men who had done what duty demanded. Sergeant Meeser never spoke of his service until shortly before his death in 1993, telling his grandson, "We did what we had to do. Nobody should be proud of burning men alive, but those tanks saved a lot of Marine lives." That's what I try to remember. Veterans of the flame tanks formed their own informal support network after the war. They met annually in Hawaii, returning to Schofield Barracks where their weapons had been created. These reunions, unreported by media, allowed men to share experiences too terrible for civilian understanding. The last reunion was held in 2010, attended by only 4 surviving crew members. The Japanese perspective emerged slowly through prisoner interrogations and captured documents. Soldiers who had been taught that death in battle guaranteed spiritual transcendence found themselves paralyzed by the fear of incineration. The dishonor of fleeing from combat positions seemed preferable to dying in underground ovens. This psychological collapse contributed to the first large-scale surrenders in Japanese military history. Lieutenant Yamada, who had witnessed the first flamethrower tank attack on February 20th, survived the battle as one of the 216 prisoners. In post-war testimony to American intelligence officers, he reflected, "We had prepared for every form of death, bullets, shells, bayonets, starvation. We had not prepared for burning petroleum that sought us out in our deepest bunkers. The flame tanks broke our spirit in ways no conventional weapon could. They turned our greatest strength, our underground fortifications, into our tombs." Former Sergeant Masao Hayashi, captured after being burned while fleeing a bunker, provided graphic testimony. "The nap alarm came like a flood, pouring into every space. Men tried to escape through emergency exits, but found more flames waiting. Some shot themselves rather than burn. Others ran into American gunfire, preferring bullets to incineration. I saw warriors who had fought since China refused to enter positions after seeing flame tanks approaching. This was not the death we had trained for." The transformation represented by the flamethrower tanks extended into the post-war period. The United States Marine Corps, analyzing the success at Uoma, fundamentally restructured its assault doctrine around combined arms tactics integrating armor, infantry, and engineers. The concept of specialized armor for specific battlefield problems became standard military thinking. Future weapons development would prioritize adaptability and innovation over pure firepower. The technology itself continued evolving. The M4A3 or 3 Sherman flamethrower tanks served in Korea, where they proved equally effective against Chinese bunker complexes during the battles for the Punch Bowl and Heartbreak Ridge. Marine flame tanks destroyed over 300 Chinese positions during the Korean War, though with less dramatic effect due to better Chinese awareness of the weapons' capabilities. The last American flame tank, the M132 armored flamethrower, based on the M113 armored personnel carrier, wasn't retired until 1978. Ending a weapons lineage that began with 8 hastily modified Shermans in a secret warehouse in Hawaii. By then, thermomoric weapons and precision-guided munitions had replaced flamethrowers as the primary means of defeating fortified positions. International law eventually restricted flamethrower use with Protocol 3 of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons limiting incendiary weapons. The weapon that had been decisive at Uoma became controversial as public opinion shifted against weapons deemed excessively cruel. Yet military historians note the irony. The flamethrower tanks, for all their horror, had shortened the battle and potentially saved thousands of lives. That conventional assault would have claimed. The industrial achievement cannot be understated. The United States produced 49,234 Sherman tanks during World War II. Only 354 were converted to flamethrower configuration. Yet, these few hundred vehicles had impact far exceeding their numbers. At Uoma, 8 tanks had changed the course of a battle that might have lasted months and cost tens of thousands more casualties. The production cost, roughly $200,000 per converted tank in 1945, seems trivial compared to the lives saved. Military analysts calculated that each flame tank at Uoma potentially preserved 625 American casualties based on casualty rates in unsupported versus flame-supported attacks. In the cold calculus of war, the investment in technology had paid dividends in blood not spilled. But perhaps the most profound legacy was psychological. The flamethrower tanks had demonstrated that technological innovation could overcome even the most fanatical human resistance. The age of individual warrior prowess was ending, replaced by an era where victory belonged to nations capable of superior industrial production and technical innovation. The samurai spirit, for all its nobility, could not withstand liquid fire delivered by mass-produced machines. In the volcanic soil of Uoma, beneath monuments to courage and sacrifice, lie the remains of over 20,000 Japanese soldiers who died defending positions they believed impregnable. Many were incinerated by weapons they never imagined could exist. Their deaths marked not just the end of a battle, but the end of an era when spiritual dedication could overcome material disadvantage. The 8 M4A3 or 3 flamethrower tanks that fought at Uoma were ultimately machines. Steel, aluminum, rubber, and mechanical components assembled by workers who would never see combat. Yet, they represented something larger: the mobilization of American industrial might, scientific innovation, and mechanical genius in service of victory. The CBS who built them, the Marines who crewed them, and the Japanese who died facing them were all part of a transformation that would define modern warfare. Today, the last surviving flamethrower tank from Uoma sits in the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Quantico, Virginia. Tank number 434, the museum specimen, bears the scars of its service. Welding marks where armor was patched, dents from shell impacts, scratches from volcanic rock. A small plaque notes its specifications and battle history. What it cannot convey is the sound of compressed nitrogen releasing, the smell of burning napalm mixed with sulfur, the sight of liquid fire flowing like water into underground fortresses. Visitors often pass quickly, disturbed by the weapon's terrible purpose. School children on field trips ask why anyone would create such a horrible weapon. Veterans who understand its history pause longer, some saluting, others simply staring in silent remembrance. For them, the tank represents not glorification of war, but recognition of war's terrible necessities. The last reunion of Uoma Flame tank veterans was held in 2015 on the battle's 70th anniversary. Only 3 crew members attended, all in their 90s. They gathered at the museum, sharing memories with historians eager to preserve first-hand accounts. Corporal Anthony Vitelli, former gunner on Tank 436, offered perhaps the most poignant observation. People ask if I'm proud of what we did. Pride isn't the right word. We did a terrible job that had to be done. Those tanks saved Marine lives. That's enough. The men who designed, built, and operated these machines have almost all passed into history. Corporal Herschel Woody Williams, who fought alongside the flame tanks with his portable flamethrower, was the last Medal of Honor recipient from Uoma to die, passing in June 2022 at age 98. With him went the last living memory of flame warfare's terrible reality. His foundation continues to honor Gold Star families, ensuring the sacrifice of those who died is not forgotten. Colonel UNMAR's classified reports declassified in the 1970s revealed a frantic pace of innovation that produced the flame tanks. Working 20-hour days, sleeping in shifts beside their welding equipment, the CBS had accomplished what conventional military procurement would have taken years to achieve. Their reward was seeing their creation succeed beyond all expectations, shortening one of the Pacific War's bloodiest battles. The Japanese military archives, opened to researchers in the 1980s, provide the enemy perspective on facing flame tanks. Report after report describes the paralysis of watching liquid fire approach, knowing that concrete and steel offered no protection. Orders to hold positions to the death became meaningless when death came as flowing fire that sought out every hiding place. One Japanese report noted, the flame tanks negated every advantage of our defensive positions. Height meant nothing when fire could arc over obstacles. Depth meant nothing when flame flowed like water into our tunnels. Concrete and steel that could withstand tons of explosive were useless against liquid fire. General Kurabayashi's final message, transmitted just before his death in late March 1945, contained a prescient observation. The Americans have not just defeated us with superior numbers or firepower. They have defeated us with superior imagination, turning our greatest strength, our underground fortifications, into death traps. Future wars will belong to nations that can imagine new forms of warfare, not those who perfect old ones. His prediction proved accurate. The revolution in military affairs that began with 8 flame tanks at Uoma continued through guided missiles, precision weapons, and cyber warfare. The principle remained constant. Technological innovation defeats traditional tactics. Imagination triumphs over convention. The transformation from conventional to flame warfare at Uoma took just days, but changed combat doctrine forever. Marines who had been trained for traditional assault tactics learned to coordinate with flame tanks using their shock effect to break defensive lines thought impregnable. This integration happened not through formal training but through battlefield innovation adaptation under fire that exemplified American military flexibility. Statistical analysis conducted after the war revealed striking patterns in sectors where flame tanks operated. Japanese defenders were 70% more likely to abandon positions before being overrun. The psychological impact exceeded the physical destruction. The mere presence of flame tanks at a sector often caused defensive collapse without firing a shot. One Marine intelligence report noted, the enemy's fear of flame tanks borders on panic. Prisoners report that soldiers refuse orders to occupy positions once flame tanks are spotted in the area. The 8 flamethrower tanks of Uoma had achieved something remarkable. In 36 days of combat, they had validated a new form of warfare, saved thousands of American lives, and contributed to victory in one of World War II's most crucial battles. Their legacy lived on in every subsequent conflict where American forces faced entrenched enemies, from Korea to Vietnam to Iraq. Yet the moral questions remain unresolved. The tank crews who survived often struggled with what they had done. The efficiency of killing by fire, the industrial scale of incineration, challenged traditional concepts of honorable warfare. These men had been instruments of a terrible necessity, wielding weapons that turned human beings to ash in seconds. Many never spoke of their service, taking their memories to the grave rather than burden others with the horror. The final testament comes from a 1985 reconciliation ceremony on Ioma. Former tank commander Robert Meza and former Lieutenant Koshi Yamada, who had witnessed the first flame tank attack, stood together where Tank 431 had first fired 40 years earlier. Yamada spoke through an interpreter. I hated you for 40 years. The flame tanks killed my friends in ways I cannot forget. But I understand now. War makes monsters of us all. You did what you had to do, as did we. Meeser responded simply. We were all just boys trying to survive. I'm glad we both lived to stand here today. The two old warriors embraced. As the sun set over Uwama's black sand beaches, the veterans walked together toward the memorial to all who died. Behind them, Mount Suribachi rose against the darkening sky. The island that had once burned with combat fury had returned to peace. The age of the flamethrower tank had begun and ended in the Pacific, its legacy written in fire across volcanic islands. 8 modified Shermans had changed the nature of warfare, demonstrating that victory in modern conflict belonged to nations capable of wedding industrial might to battlefield innovation. The flames had long since vanished, yet their impact on military history remains indelible. Ultimately, the Battle of Uwama was not won by sheer bravery alone, though courage was abundant on both sides, but by the fusion of American industrial strength and battlefield ingenuity. The flamethrower tanks embodied the intersection of technology, strategy, and determination that would define American military dominance for decades. These weapons, brutal but necessary, met the demands of a war that required total victory. The Japanese defenders had displayed extraordinary valor, constructing the most formidable defensive network in the Pacific, a subterranean fortress impervious to conventional arms. Yet they had not anticipated the fiery torrents that rained from the flamethrower tanks, seeking every cave and bunker, turning their sanctuaries into infernos. Their defeat was not a failure of bravery but a collision with superior innovation and technological advantage. The statistics tell the story with unflinching clarity: 8 flamethrower tanks, 360,000 gallons of fuel mixture, over 1,000 fortified positions destroyed, an estimated 5,000 American casualties averted, more than 6,000 Japanese soldiers killed by flame weapons, and 36 grueling days of combat that could have extended into months without this decisive technology. Uwama, now restored to Japan and renamed Iwoto, bears few outward scars. Nature has reclaimed shell craters and filled trenches with volcanic soil. Beneath the surface, however, sealed caves and collapsed tunnels still contain the remains of those who perished in the inferno, their sacrifice fading in memory. General Holland Smith, commander of the 5th Amphibious Corps at Uwama, reflected in his memoirs, the flamethrower tanks were the difference between victory and disaster. Without them, the cost of taking every yard would have been unbearable. They were terrible weapons, but war is a terrible enterprise. Ultimately, they saved more lives than any other armament we employed. Though the flames that engulfed Japanese positions have long since faded, and the men who operated them have mostly passed, the revolution they initiated, the shift from personal valor to technological supremacy, continues to influence military thought globally. In 8 modified Sherman tanks, America had found the key to breaching the Pacific War's most impregnable fortress, reshaping warfare in the process. The battle ended. The broader war would soon conclude. Yet the echoes of those flames, the hiss of compressed nitrogen, the cascade of burning fuel into hidden bunkers, and the screams silenced by heat, will reverberate through military history forever. The era of the lone warrior concluded in fire on a volcanic isle. The era of technological warfare had begun.